We are going to make keto chicken and dumplings. I could tell you all about my childhood memories of chicken and dumplings, but you don't care about that. You just want to know how to make it. So let's get at it. Spoiler alert, I have no childhood memories of chicken and dumplings. First, we're going to get a couple tablespoons of olive oil warming over the stove. Then we're going to start chopping up our chicken into about 2-inch cubes. And if you need to make this soup quicker, if you don't have a couple hours to let it simmer, just chop the chicken up smaller into 1/2-inch or 3/4-inch squares. If you do that, you can make the whole soup in about an hour. The chicken's not going to shred as well as if it simmers for 2 or 3 hours, but it's still going to taste great. Next, you're going to brown the chicken in your preheated pan, and be sure to season as you go, at least with a little bit of salt and pepper. Now you'll notice that the chicken is sticking to the pan here. That is good. We want that. Those little burned on bits are going to create a lot of flavor once we deglaze the pan. Now I'm using my left hand so that I don't block the camera and you can actually see what I'm doing, but feel free to use your dominant hand so it doesn't take you 7 tries to turn one piece of chicken. And while that chicken finishes browning, it's time to chop our vegetables. So real quick, I want to tell you, because we are making this keto, we are not using carrots or onions. When you cook down carrots or onions or even peppers, all the way down to where they get soft, the fiber breaks down and then that counts as just a straight starch. It's no longer, the fiber no longer offsets the carbs. So we don't use carrots, onions, peppers, anything, anywhere that we have to cook it all the way down, or like in a soup where it's gonna cook fully. If you do wanna add those, you just have to count those as a full carb because again, there's no fiber to offset that. So since we're not using those, we're gonna use portobello mushrooms to give it some richness, some body, and just to kind of offset the fact that we're not using some of those staple soup items. So back to the recipe. Now we're gonna take 3 to 4 stalks of celery and 3 baby portobello mushrooms and chop them into about 1/2-inch slices. Again, if you're in a hurry, just chop them up smaller and they'll cook down faster. After that, we're going to crush and then chop 5 cloves of garlic. Next, we're going to take the chicken out of the pan and set that aside, and then add in your celery and your mushrooms, and we're going to let those cook down for about 3 or 4 minutes. Go ahead and season those with a little bit of salt and some onion powder, and then give them a good stir so that they don't burn to the bottom of the pan. After those have been going for about 3 or 4 minutes, we're going to add in our garlic and cook that for 1 minute. You do not want it to burn, you just want it to brown a little. Next, we're going to deglaze the pan by adding in just enough chicken stock to cover the bottom of the pan, and then stirring and scraping the bottom of the pan with a wooden spoon or a spatula. Then we're going to add in our chicken, and then add in enough stock to bring it up to 64 ounces. That would be a total of 2 boxes or 4 cans of chicken stock. Then we're going to give that a good stir, bring it to a boil, and then cover that and let that simmer over low heat for at least 2 or 3 hours. Once your soup's been going for a couple hours, it's time to make the dumplings. But first things first. In a mixing bowl, we're going to combine 1.5 cups of almond flour, 1/4 cup of coconut flour, a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, a 1/2 teaspoon of xanthan gum, 3/4 teaspoon of salt, about a teaspoon of black pepper, and we're going to mix that up well. Next, add 3/4 cup of shredded mozzarella to your food processor and pulse a few times to begin chopping the mozzarella. Then add 1/2 cup of the dry mix to your food processor, pulse it a couple of times to begin mixing it, and then process it until it is a smooth, uniform texture. But don't go too long because you don't want to create so much heat that the cheese starts to melt. Then add the rest of your dry mix and process until it's fully incorporated. Next, add 1/2 cup of heavy cream and pulse that until it's mixed well. Then add 2 eggs, one at a time, mixing in between, and then process until it is a uniform texture. Use a rubber spatula to transfer the dough to a mixing bowl, and then finely chop 1 stick of frozen butter. Make sure the butter is frozen, otherwise it'll start to melt and make the dough too moist before it starts to set up. Once the butter is chopped, put that in the bowl with your dough mix and use a rubber spatula to fold the butter into the dough. Once the butter is evenly distributed, we can set that aside and it's time to go get our soup. Now we're going to thicken the soup by adding 2 teaspoons of xanthan gum and stirring immediately. Don't do what I did and let it sit there for a couple minutes, because otherwise you're just going to make dumplings, but not the kind that we're trying to make. Next, use 2 spoons to gently place scoops of dumpling dough on top of the soup. Once your dumplings have been placed, cover and simmer on medium-low heat for 10 minutes, then uncover and cook for an additional 10 minutes. After the first 10 minutes, when I took the lid off, the dumplings were still pretty doughy, so I let them cook for an extra 5 minutes covered and then uncovered them for 10 minutes. Once the dumplings are finished, remove them from the stove and then use a slotted spoon to carefully remove the dumplings from the soup and set them aside for a few minutes so they can just set up a little bit more. You are welcome to skip this step if you want, but I found last time I made these, when I took them out and let the dumplings sit for a couple minutes, they set up a lot more. They kind of dried out a little bit and got more like a traditional dumpling. We also need to add in the last of our chicken broth, and that would be really hard to do with the dumplings on top. You could, if you didn't want to take the dumplings out and you just wanted to serve it, you could add a little bit of broth in the bottom of a bowl and just serve the soup on top of it. But the soup as is, between the dumplings, some of the dumpling dough mixing into the soup and the xanthan gum and just reducing it, the soup is very thick right now and has reduced a lot in volume. So we're going to add in the last of the broth. Removing the dumplings can be a pain. It works best with a slotted spoon so that you don't get a lot of liquid out with them, but it really is worth it. So you can add the water back to the soup. This makes a super hearty soup. It's still, even with that extra broth in, is still pretty thick. So what we're going to do now, we're going to serve our soup and then serve the dumplings on top of it. So this is keto chicken and dumplings. It is a great recipe, not too hard. You do need to let the soup simmer, so it does take a couple hours start to finish to make. If you have any questions, definitely let us know. You can find us on Facebook at Burrells Go Keto, on Instagram at Burrells Go Keto, on our website, burrellsgoketo.com. Leave us a comment on this video. We would love to help you. I love a good challenge. I love cooking. I love figuring out new recipes. So if there's something that you've been craving from your non-keto days that we can maybe try and help you find a keto version of, definitely let us know. I'm gonna eat now because this has been going for like 5 hours. Seriously, one of the most important parts of this recipe is browning the chicken and deglazing the pan. That brings, and also letting the celery and the mushrooms cook good and kind of brown, and that just, you'll see it. You don't want to burn what's on the bottom of the pan, but you do want it to brown a little bit. That makes such a rich, complex flavor that you can just taste in the broth. And the fact that this simmered for a couple hours, it's awesome. The chicken is shredded. The dumplings are delicious. And it's just all around a good recipe. Cold weather's coming. It's gonna be great. Make it this fall. You'll love it.